shortly. If you're not a panelist, we ask that you please mute your camera and mute your audio. This will be recorded too, just to make sure everybody knows. Like again, if you're not a panelist, please mute your audio and your video. Well, I can mute people too, looks like maybe. All right. That's great. And I probably, one of us maybe should have had some music in the background as I didn't think about that. Although I do have a question about that.
What is the question?
No. We gotta go in order. So.
Marvin Gaye?
No.
What is the question?
No, the question is not, the question is for the panelists once, we get around our table. So right now people are still arriving, they're getting in their seats, so that's good. But as soon as you're ready, Dr. Aldine, I think we can get started.
Now?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's cool.
Welcome. Assalamu alaikum. I am just so excited. If I could jump, I would jump up out of my seat to have all of you here with us. This program, project, symposium is a product of the Black Muslim Internationalism Project that comes out of loose supported, but it comes out of the AbuSulayman Center at George Mason University. I am seeking to have Muslims of African descent talk to each other. And then I looked and I said, whoa, gotta have some women here. And because women have lots of other things to talk about. I was reading an article today, which I will share with all of you offline, on what Nigerian women are doing. Some in Senegal and some in other states are doing with women entering the public space. So I'll share that article with all of you later. I asked Dr. Suad Abdul Kabir to join me in my kitchen, where I do hair, I do braids, I do, what did I say? I do braids, I do crochet, I do press and curl, I do locks. I got a list that now is escaping me, but I do all of those things. And I asked these women in particular across generations, across communities, to talk about themselves in leadership of organizations that both serve our communities and other communities. Muslim women's organizations are not well known. They will be well known after this conversation, but right now they are not well known. And so your job is, while I'm washing and drying and blow drying some and letting dry others, along with Dr. Suad, have a discussion. With that, I'm going to get off camera because it's your discussion. I will listen in. This is not a formal discussion. If you mess up in my kitchen, I will burn your scalp.
All right, well, on that note, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I want to welcome everyone to our conversation today. As Dr. Aldine said, this is a part of a series of conversations that is a part of the Black Muslim Internationalist Project. And I'm really excited to sort of be in this, in her kitchen at the table with this illustrious group of women who represent, really the diversity of what the Black and the Muslim and the Black Muslim Internationalism Project mean. Today, I'm not going to read you their bios, which are plenty. The bios are, when you signed up, so you got the bios, but I will just kind of go around the table to remind us quickly who we have with us. So we have Angelica Lindsey-Ali, who's the founder of the Village Auntie Institute. We have Asha Noor, a human rights advocate. We have Harriet Lewis, an entrepreneur in the private and nonprofit sectors. We're also joined by Rabia Muhammad, educator and author. We have Rashida James Sadia, the director of the Muslim Power Building Project. Sadia Bashir, an award-winning poet. And last but not least, Sadie Sarr, an award-winning social justice advocate. And so, as I mentioned, we're trying to keep a vibe here. Now we're in these boxes, we're in these Zoom screens. I get it, right? But we're gonna try to sort of have a really generative conversation and a comfortable conversation, the kind we would have if we were all sitting around somebody's table. And so to do that, I just had a quick question for y'all. So you're about to head out on a long road trip, right? Who is on your playlist? Sade, Aretha, or Beyonce?
Aretha.
All right, go ahead. Just tell me, who's on your playlist?
Sade.
Sade, all right.
I'm listening to Renaissance to and from. It's on repeat. So Beyonce.
You got a Beyonce, all right.
No, I'm going with Aretha because she got moods. She got moods for the traffic jam. She got moods for the speed, and she a Detroit girl. So I got to go with Auntie Riri.
All right.
Why do we have to choose? Why can't we have all three?
That was my answer too. I'm Team Harriet. I'm Team Harriet because I was like, that's kind of hard. I feel like, why can't we have it all?
Why we gotta be difficult? Why you can't follow the rules? I guess this is why you're all leaders, right? Wait, Sadie, who you picking? Are you on team 3 or you picking one?
No,
Wait, I can't hear. What'd you say?
I pick Aretha Franklin.
All right, Aretha, very good. All right.
And notice all the local Detroiters or the people who live in Detroit. And I was so close to saying Aretha. I was like,
No,
Angelica.
no. I picked Aretha before Detroit.
Before Detroit. Okay, we'll give you
my.
Very good. All right. So let's get into our conversation on that note. So we're here to talk about, as Dr. Aldine said, this question of leadership and women in leadership. We chose the title for today's conversation, are all the leaders male, right? Because there's definitely challenges that women face in the Muslim community across difference, but also in the Black Muslim community around sort of leadership roles women take anyway, right? And so I guess my first question just to kind of what does leadership look like to you? Like as a Black Muslim woman, what does it look like to you? Or what is your leadership story? I guess that's my first question. Anybody can sort of take that. Look at y'all shy. Y'all got these questions in advance. So act like you don't.
Okay, I'll start. Leadership, because I'm an English teacher. And so I actually looked up the word in Roger's thesaurus because I'm like, I want us to know what are we talking about? And one of the phrases that came up in leadership, which Roger defines as an abstract relationship, is co-pilot. Mm-hmm. All right. And so that's kind of how I see leadership in my community, in the Nation of Islam, because one of the things that we're committed to is community development. And so there are pieces of it that men do, and there are pieces of it that women do, but all of the pieces are necessary. So for me, it's co-pilot.
Nice. All right. Co-piloting.
I kind of see it the same way, and I think about my leadership experience has been along those lines. Leadership for me is facilitating growth and change in others. So it's not you standing in a space and just being and doing and quote unquote leading, but inspiring, supporting the development of others. I think to be an effective leader, you have to have an aspect of humility, and you have to want to see the growth and success in others and see the big picture. The big picture is the growth and success in others that lifts the community up.
I'm just going to say that I don't know that I am considered a leader in the Muslim community. I think I am seen as a leader of women which is very different. I think if you were to ask people in the broader Muslim community, i.e. men, they will say, well, Angelica does stuff for women. So I believe that my leadership journey has been one of marginalization, because even amongst some women, because of the things that people think that I do, they assume that I cannot be emblematic of what a practicing Muslim woman should be. So my leadership journey has really been about cultivating guidance, sisterhood, community, and connection in spaces that can see me for me. I didn't embark on this work to be a leader. I embarked on this work to reach my people, all of my people. It just so happens that the people who leaned in and listened first were women.
Well, wait a minute. Can you, I'm messing and I'm interrupting.
I don't want my scalp getting burnt. Now, I
Oh, shush.
drama.
You talk a lot about sexual relations, marital relations. You can't do that mono.
You can't.
Gotta be two people. It used to be. Things change, and I'm
I
old.
don't know about that.
I mean, but I think, so one of the critiques that I received when I was in Philadelphia last week was from a brother who said, I really didn't know what you were about. I just knew I wasn't down with it because I thought you were this thing. So I think you hear Muslim woman, you see hijab, you see Black woman, you see me talking about sex and orgasms and all of these other kinds of things. It conjures this idea of what people think that I do. And so he said, I felt like what you were talking about was antithetical to what we need to have as Black Muslim women representation. So I think it's the resistance to engage and the urgency to categorize before people even get in touch with what it is that I'm actually doing. Because I talk about sexuality, people just, automatically jump the gun. So
they're not having sex.
They are having sex, and some of them are probably having very bad sex because they don't listen to me. But then the wives come in. So this is the thing, right? The wives listen to me, and then they get like an earshot of what I'm actually talking about, and they realize that I'm really talking about internal transformation and personal liberation, and the erotic being one vehicle for that. So then they're like, oh, okay, you're not so bad. But it's, if I were a man, I would be a millionaire. I wouldn't even have time to be on a Zoom panel because I'd be all over the world somewhere.
Yeah, you need Dubai like that other guy right now.
Listen. Okay, but because I'm a woman and people think that I'm on some man-hating, free the coochie type movement, they don't want to engage with my work. And for a long time, that caused me a lot of pain. And really, I've pulled away from the larger Muslim community from ever trying to get validation from the larger Muslim community because of it. But I do not discount the love, support, and grace that I get from Muslim women. So.
Can I ask a question and open it up for you said the brother said to you about Black Muslim woman representation. Did he use that word, representation? He did. I think that's interesting. I was just thinking about, what, representation. I say now is a trap, but like this idea, like whose gaze is the important one there, such that, now I'm already thinking about, like I'm viewing people in my community through somebody else's gaze, right? Not necessarily through the communities, right? But but I don't know, Asha, Sadie, Rashida, Sadia, what about you? Anything resonate with you?
They're gonna make me burn their scalp. I can see it.
No, I want to keep my scalp intact, so jump right in. I would say a little bit of what Harriet shared about humility and really taking sort of like a very humble approach to leadership has been really an important piece of what I saw modeled growing up. My grandma, Allah yarhamha, she played a huge role in my development growing up, as well as my mom, but more so in terms of the personality or the direction I've taken in terms of leadership is more so, I think, likened to my grandma. And I think if you look at her in the traditional sense of what leadership should look like, she wasn't that. She was very, strong and quiet in her leadership, which I think is kind of not seen as a prototype. You know, she was really like a good role model. She always kind of had solutions, kind of like a natural conflict resolution person. And it's no surprise that my academic or graduate background ended up going towards conflict resolution. And I feel like, you know, she kind of had she's like a very quiet form of leadership. I wouldn't say I'm as quiet as her, but kind of that strength of matriarch in the house, someone who's able to step in and be like, let's, you know, take a moment, let's take a step back, let's look at where we want to go, where we want to see things. And I think that that type of leadership is discounted largely within the Muslim community. It's sort of like the person or the people who are praised are those who are kind of like the preacher, like, let me get on a pulpit, let me be like this very like this bravado, this like, you know, overpowering sense. And that's kind of what we see as a leader. But I think that the strength in a lot of Black women leadership is that matriarch, that, you know, that sort of that strength in that like servant leadership model, that I can get things done, I can take every part of the role, I can do it in a humble way, I can do it in a graceful way. And so that's what I would like to aspire in my leadership style. I don't know if I'm there yet, but I think that that was really a beautiful way that my grandma modeled that for me.
I resonate a lot with that. My mother always used to have, she still does, have the saying, bring them to your home. She always used to say, like, whatever it is that you do, bring them to your home, right? And when I was a kid, I was like, girl, what does that mean? But like understanding that now as an adult, I get the idea of like, I'm comfy in my home. This is my space. This is my domain, right? And so everything that I do, right, every person who interacts with me has to come into my space, my domain, where I am comfortable, in order to address me, in order to be in my presence. And so for me, I feel like that has a deep sense of my, like, where, how I choose to define myself as a leader is someone who is always looking at things with, am I comfortable in this first before I can express it? Is this where I reside before I can kind of like speak that truth to power, especially as a poet? There's a lot of kind of internalized, like, am I really telling the truth? Because it can be very glamorous to sit here and talk about things, you know, that as a Muslim, I understand, right? Like the conflict in Palestine, for example, right? I'm not Palestinian, but as a Muslim, I empathize with that. I speak about that. But for me, I'm just like, there are Palestinian poets, right? And so that is not my home. So in speaking truth to power, I have to be very comfortable in what is my home, what is my avenue, what is my truth. So I think that's what's coming to mind in regards to leadership.
I really like this question, what is your leadership story? Because it made me think for a bit. And I will say there are several questions that I asked myself and that sit at the center of my work. And the first one is, like, what ways of being in community have been passed down to me? And the second is, like, what parts of those things do I want to carry forward, or do I desperately need to put down? And I think in thinking about those things and centering those questions, I realized that I tend to focus less on what singular leadership models looks like. And instead, I devote my energy and my time to kind of figuring out what it means to build and participate and respond to the needs, and to sustain a community. Like, how am I responding to the needs of folks that I'm in community with? And more importantly, I think my ideas about leadership are they're collaborative. I'm constantly thinking from a collaborative model. And I feel that ultimately that's where my leadership story begins, just sort of like watching Black women collectively create, sustain, and work through complicated social issues in community with imperfect beings. And just countless examples of folks showing me how, like, your home can easily become a meeting place, an after-school program, a community kitchen, a conference on collective liberation. I think these examples and ways of being that I saw throughout my childhood are things that continue to shape my work and my life. And they were given to me by women that I consider to be scholars of belonging, scholars of radical imagination, scholars on how to get to a root and cause of an issue, and scholars on finding a way out of no way. And so as someone who's leading an organization and someone who identifies as an educator and a cultural organizer, I'm always thinking about collaborative work as a practice. I think it's an ongoing practice. I don't necessarily think it's a thing that I'm going to master or that anyone can master. I think we're consistently learning how to do this work in community and in relationship with folks. And part of collaborative work for me is just pushing against this Western notion of singular leadership and really just sort of going back to me, which just feels very, very Black and very Muslim, to the reality that it's a necessity for many hands to do this work. We are not going to move forward with one person. It actually is not a sustainable model for various reasons. And so leadership for me is sort of thinking about how can I see like leadership in others, and where do we meet in the middle to sort of like figure out what part of this work we can lift up and do so that we can do this collectively. All of it should not be on my back, which I think is like the narrative for too many Black women. And so how do we share this load and also benefit in the success?
For me, I go back a lot into culture. So I come from a very matriarchal society. I'm Sierra Minka, and we are very heavy and rooted into our matrilineal lines. So a lot of things happen around the woman, with the woman at the center of it. So even though with the preposition of Islam on cultures like mine, women have found a way to remain within the center of decision being made into their communities. My grandma used to always say to us when we first completed some level of rite of passage to understand what does it mean to be a head and a neck. And then she would go and say, hey, remember one thing, you don't have to be the head of the household, but understand that as a neck, you can make the head turn any way you want. So ensure that you remain that neck that can be flexible, that can be stiff, that can give a headache, but that can also be smooth when it's needed to be. Because without a neck, there will be no head, because you cannot put a head on shoulders, right? And the shoulders can't carry that. So in here, in this space in the US, doing immigrant rights organizing, my leadership has been about serving community and doing that with other women who understand why we should make sure that our kin is our wealth. And if we take care of our kin, then the community wealth is going to be abundant and flowing. Then the work become one of community agency through the lens and the needs of women, through the understanding of creating space where women can be comfortable so that they continue pouring into their communities and ensuring that the communities is being lifted up.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think, it's real interesting. I'll be honest, I've heard that metaphor of like the neck and the head, like does not resonate with me at all. And I understand the metaphor, like I get it, right? And even I was thinking about what Asha was saying in terms of being quiet, right? And I was thinking to myself, I see that, right? But I also wonder about how like the ways in which that quietness, like how do women continue to, what do I want to say? Because I'm not quiet, I'm loud. I'm not quiet, I'm not, like I'm loud, right? And I feel like there's this idea of being the neck or being quiet, right? That I think actually does work. Like I'm not disagreeing with that, right? It literally works, right? But also sometimes I feel like it gets used against women, right? Because if you don't fit something, then somehow you end up being outside of it. So that brings me to my next question, right? And this was a question that came from when we had when we had advertised, I asked some folks, like, what kind of questions did you want to hear from people? And so one of the questions someone had was, have you ever been blocked by male leaders or by others because you are a woman? Right. So like you're doing your thing, like you're stating you're running your immigrant rights, work, you're doing your cultural organizing, you're doing your work, right? You doing it and you're servants, right? You're not really concerned about, the fame and the shine, all that kind of stuff. You're trying to get work done, right? But have you ever experienced a block, right? Someone be like, no, you can't do this work, right? Because you're, and if you have, how did you deal with that?
Not that you cannot do this work, because nobody in my community here is doing this work. So they cannot tell me you cannot do this work. What have happened though was saying it's not that hard. Acting like the work is easy. Acting like everybody else can do it, right? So what it had led in my community is having people doing application for immigration or passing information. And anytime you do that kind of thing, down the line, this person come back to my office and I'm looking at your case and I'm like, why did you do this? And I'm finding out this person in our community who have been just having bad cases, to the point that I had to go and be like, okay, somebody needs to talk to him and tell him to stop doing this, because this is not good and it is hurting the community, right? So having to undo bad work because your position was, oh, everybody can do that. Then after that, a while, I decided that I was not going to undo bad work, because if I am in this community doing this work and you chose to go to somebody that we know have a track record of doing bad work, maybe you wanted to have bad work. So when you come to me now, I cannot undo the work, because this is not my role. I'm not here to pick up after you because you are a man and you know it all. So I just stopped picking up after those bad cases that was already messed up, which actually changed the conversation, where now people are like, oh, no, I'm going to go to Sadie first, because, well, it took me a while to get there, because before I was caught into, oh my God, it's going to be bad. It's going to lead to deportation. Let me still clean up. And after a while, I was like, you know what? No, I'm not cleaning up. That's not my role. So if you have the choice and you chose that, well, deal with the consequences of that. And I just left it be.
Rabia, go ahead.
Yeah, I first of all, I really like all of the passion that everybody has. But for me, if a man tells me in my community, no, you can't do that, I don't accept that. That's the first thing. You got to stand your ground on, first of all, what the Quran says the position of the woman is. That's number one. And then number two, in whatever community you have, there has to be a culture about who the woman is and where her role is. Her home is her base, is her place, but it's not her base. She doesn't have to confine all of her work there. So she can go out into the fields and do whatever she wants. So for me, the important thing is to oppose it and bring it to some body within the community that can reconcile, where each of us are presenting our cases, so to speak, and with belief that the arbiter or the arbitrator is going to have an even hand. And I have been in situations where I brought something I was in that situation and I brought it to the ultimate arbiter in our community and won my case. And so I think stand your ground. Don't accept a block. No, turn over the tables.
I think that there are consequences to standing your ground. I think all of you all are wonderful, but you're too tippy-toe. Let me play. I'm still the beautician. And all of you all have shown up. And I said, why they got all this stuff on? What can they do, really? What are their lives like? And then I find out that she leads this. She is a poet over there. She's for social justice. And the Quran says nothing about being quiet. You know, Muslims are men and women. And now you're telling me, the beautician, about negotiations for standing your damn ground. I don't get it. Explain, please.
So Dr. Aldine, and so I was sitting there thinking about, what you had said as it relates to leadership and voice. And I think over the years, now I'm in the auntie space, but over the years, leadership has changed. There was a time, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when, men would refer to me as, you have issues with men. You're a male hater. You don't know your
They
space.
still talk about you, Harriet. What's wrong with you?
But what I've learned, and I'm continuously learning and evolving and growing and trying to find the right time and space. There's a time and space for everything, and I'm getting better. There's still a lot to learn. Still growing as a human being. That sometimes you need to get in somebody's face, not always in public. Sometimes you need to get in somebody's face in private as well, and demonstrate that leadership. I think that, have I ever been blocked? I think during that time, 30 years ago, yeah, there was an attempt to block my leadership at that time, but I had other supportive sisters and other men who were supporting my leadership at that time. And then I got to a place where I don't have time to wait for somebody to give me an opportunity to lead. I just create. I don't have time for that. So I don't experience blocking too much because I don't allow that to happen. I just do somewhere else in a space. What I have seen, not so much blocking as a Black woman, and this is something that we have to navigate and I'm not trying to change the subject or even interject this, but I'm just going to acknowledge this because this has come up in conversation, is that sometimes Black women, Black Muslim women are elevated in spaces in the work over Black men. And I just want to acknowledge that as well. And we have to, as Black women, have to navigate that space as well in our homes and our lives, if we so choose. And
so yes, okay. So I saw steady like, yes, girl, yes about don't being blocked, but then you were like, Black men are elevated. We're like, wait, huh?
Like I said, not elevated.
No, I'm saying Black women are elevated over Black men in certain spaces.
In certain spaces, yeah.
Where, child, where?
Yeah, can we get some examples?
Because I'm struggling,
No, right, and probably in corporate America, but I work in my career has been in nonprofit space. So just at corporate government spaces, absolutely, we see more Black men. But I work, my background is in nonprofit spaces, and I've been elevated by white men. I've been elevated by other men who are not Black, and you just don't see Black men in those spaces. And I don't know, it's because Black men have not chosen to go in those spaces. I don't know if it's just as being seen as a women's space. I don't know, but I've seen Black men being blocked in leadership roles in different organizations, in nonprofit organizations. I'm going to say specifically nonprofit organizations.
And Harriet, I don't care if they're Black. I care about women.
No, I know. I was saying that
we're
talking about being blocked, and I was just saying I haven't been blocked. I've been elevated. The one time I was, attempted to be blocked, that was 30 years ago. And yeah, I said, I'm not trying to change the topic. I'm just
No, but I appreciate that. And I also see, I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat, right? Some people are thinking, I think, pointing out the point around like, I think it was America Harris saying that, the onus of resolution cannot just be on the person being blocked, but community support is needed, right? And so I think going back to something that Rabia was saying too, is that, so you can, because I was thinking about this idea of not being blocked and what you were saying, Harry, and even when Angelica was talking earlier about the marginalization she experienced, so you can leave a space, you can sort of create your own thing, and so you're not going to be blocked there. But do you feel like, I know in my own experience, it feels like, but the community you seek to serve, right, they will come to your thing, but your relationship to that community is not the same, right? You build your own thing, right? And you do your thing, right? But there's some loss there, I feel like, because you're sort of like, I don't know, like you're doing this, and you're saying no, Angelica, go ahead.
I don't feel a loss because I feel like if it's my space, I can do my thing in my way for my people. And the loss is on the wider community that has chosen to marginalize me. I've never been blocked by a male leader, but I'm just gonna have to say, I've had some men come in and try to co-opt my village, who have tried to come in and profit financially off of my name, who have come in and tried to insert themselves as co-conspirators in this disruptive movement that I have created, which lets me know that there's value, because you don't come for something that's cheap. You come for something that has value. You don't come for an empty treasure box. You come for something that's full from the brim. So I think the loss in creating a community is on the people who chose to not recognize that there was a need for the community in the first place. And so now, although my community was first predicated on the need for women to have a safe and vulnerable space, now you see men who are like, wait a minute, what y'all doing over here? Can I get some of that? Can I be down? So now you have men who know, and we can establish parameters around which they can engage, and we can enforce that. And some of that has started to seep into other environments in the larger Muslim community, where people will say, well, Sister Angelica, you can't sit on this panel, but can you recommend 2 or 3 other sisters who can do that? They might not have done that with me 5 years ago, but they know that I have my hands in the community. So I always see, who made the quote, how can someone deny themselves the pleasure of my company? It's your loss. You're the one who's losing. That's right. You're losing if you don't choose to engage with me. So maybe that is a trauma response that I have had to adopt because of the ways that I have existed in the Muslim community for the 24 years that I have been a Muslim. But at this point in my life, it's serving me well. So I'm just gonna keep doing it.
So I have not been blocked before, and I feel pretty confident that if that ever happens, someone would get their feelings hurt, and I'm pretty sure it would not be me. What I have experienced is like this, I want to call it like a wife/secretary syndrome, where as I'm someone who's leading an organization, I am paying you for your expertise. I am paying you to contribute in my work so that we can do what's necessary to benefit American Muslim communities nationwide. We're having the meetings, we're unpacking all the things. I'm letting you know what I need you to do, what time we're gonna meet up next. And you're then asking me to remind you, to send you a text, to call you, to send you an email, because you're married and you have a family and you're leading a community and you sell cupcakes on the weekend. Like, I'm married, I have children, I sell mangoes on the weekend. I'm leading a whole organization. I'm confused. I'm confused. So I have not been blocked, but I do think there's like this weird element of seemingly for some brothers, like respecting your leadership position while at the same time having this expectation that because you are a woman, you're going to like gracefully guide them through the process and help them to stay on task and to do the work. And I'm not going to pay you and help you do the work at the same time. That doesn't make sense. It's not conventional for me. When that has happened, I feel like I've been in a space of, I don't know if you're doing this intentionally, but this is how it's landing with me. So we need to have a conversation about it, because I don't want to be passive aggressive, which is very easy to do. And I don't want to avoid that it's happening. And if the conversation goes well or wrong, you will at least then tell other men who will either not work with me in the future, or if they do work with me, they will not do what you just did.
Right. All right. Anybody else? Go ahead, Harriet.
I want to comment on that, because even as I'm listening to that, I'm thinking about the place in the organization. So is she elevated to second in charge as opposed to being in charge, and were other men blocked, and she was elevated so that she could serve as that role, because he could not have those expectations of another man in that role. So that's interesting as far as, acknowledging and embracing and allowing a woman to be the leader that she is, as opposed to elevating her to a title, but expect secretarial obligations as opposed to, if someone else in that space, you wouldn't allow that to be. That's something else to unpack another day.
Right. No, I mean, I hear you. And I think that's interesting too, about, I think what this idea of what women's roles are supposed to be when they are leaders, right? Like, how are they supposed to do that? And anyway, I won't put too much more into this. Before I want to open, anyone else got something to say before we kind of, I want to get a little deeper into this, but I don't want to block y'all.
Well, I just want to ask Sadia, since she's listening and she is our resident poet in this conversation, to be taking notes because I want to find my lady. Thank you.
Got you, Shola. I will say, in regards to this, I don't think I've ever been blocked, but I have been, I hope this is a new phrase so I can make it into a slogan, placeholdered, if that makes sense. So I am only here, you all have only brought me in because you needed entertainment for the night, right? While everyone's eating, you needed someone to entertain everyone while everyone's eating. They're not even listening to me, right? I'm talking about trauma. I'm talking about life as a Black Muslim woman, right? I'm talking about mass incarceration while y'all eating. Y'all thought y'all thought that was a good idea, right? So I don't think I've been blocked, but I have had that a lot before. I remember one of my first performances for one of like a really big Muslim organization. They were like, either we can pay you or we can let your family in. Right? Either we can pay you or we can let your family in. You got to pick. And at the time, I'm like 16 years old. So I'm like, oh, well, my family really what? Because this is a really big organization. I won't say who. But you know.
Anyway.
I'm like, oh, you know, like my family, da, 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 da. And now looking back on that at 25, I'm like, what? I stay home.
Like child labor, free labor. There's a lot of questions. A lot of questions.
Right, 16, right, yeah.
Right? But I will say a lot of that goes into, especially the degradation of where artists fit, especially in the Muslim community, because I will then be requested by some predominantly white institution. They paying for my airfare, they paying for my stay, they're paying me extra. They may have even checked around to different open mics to see if I could get some more money featuring at different open mics in the area, right? So I feel like that is the problem I typically run into with Muslims.
Well, you got an open mic on this platform.
So, oh wait, Sadie, were you going to say something?
I say it's almost like when people invite you and say, hey, this is going to be a good place for you to be because it's bringing you exposure to your work or to your organization.
Everyone acts as though they are in personal contacts with Beyonce.
Like, where did you find?
What kind of exposure are we getting at this
where did you find me?
Conference?
Everyone acts like they know Jay-Z. I don't get it, because my whole thing is you can't grant me any level of exposure that I can't already grant myself. You found out who I was because of me.
Yes, 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 because of my
they
work.
Want to help you get exposure through affiliation with you. Like, and I'm like, who's exposing who? It's just a lot going on.
Oh God, so yeah, I in my book I talk about what you're talking about, Sadia. I talk about it in terms of like this kind of instrumentalization of Blackness and Black Muslims, and so this kind of thing, you kind of come and you do this thing, but you're not really valued for. Yeah, it's like you're a prop in a way, right? So this is why you're here, because you can do that type of work. But so I want to
one thing before we pivot.
Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So I guess when I was thinking about this question too, I don't think that I've also had like a direct, like straight up block that's like, hey, we're not going to let you do XYZ. But one thing I have noticed, like throughout the years, especially on panel discussions and things like that, it's like if I'm invited to be an expert on whatever topic, whether it's like conflict resolution in the Muslim community or race relations in the Muslim community or a number of issue areas I've worked on, and mind you, they're inviting me to speak on the issue as a panelist, I've noticed a few times, well, not a few times, quite often actually, sometimes the moderators, they won't really adequately sort of divide up the time amongst male or women and men speakers. And, they'll bring on, let's say, 4 or 5 panelists. We all have about same level of experience, expertise, and time in the field. And they'll kind of like pivot their questions more so towards the men leaders. Or, if I'm finishing a thought and I want to add something, they say, oh, we're running out of time, or let's give brother so-and-so the mic. Let's ask brother so-and-so his opinion. And it's like, well, why did you have me fly halfway across the country for me to listen to brother so-and-so's opinion for like 3 hours? So I've kind of seen that. And so it's not really a direct block, but it's like, we'll have you there, like, look presentable, be a Black Muslim woman, and kind of talk about something important for every 2 to 3 minute slot, but that's it. And so it's kind of like, well, then you really don't want my contribution. It's sort of like a checkbox. So kind of like what Sadia, you were saying about sort of like a placeholder. It's kind of like, you're here, chat, good, but we don't really need to hear too much about your opinion.
Wow.
We've gotten that.
So what I hear y'all saying is a couple of things. So I hear y'all saying, like, so direct blocking, like you can't do X, Y, or Z, don't really happen, but it's like a lot, it's a more, I don't want to use the word sophisticated because that's probably putting too much on it, but like there's different ways. So like your work might be devalued, right? Oh, anybody can do that type of thing, right? Or, or if someone is trying to stop you, right, then you have to, if you have a community that is kind of actually invested in sort of gender equity, then you have a means to sort of get around that. But if you don't have that community support, then then we have a problem, right? And then I also hear you saying, sometimes people, they will respect, or in theory, they respect your work, right? But in practice, they still want you to be their secretary, right? And then in other instances, I hear you also saying that, again, in theory, they think you're important, right? But they want you to sort of to be real, like a tool, you do this thing right here, but we don't really, like the depth of what the depth of your experience, the depth of what you bring, like all the stuff you actually bring, we're not super interested in that at all, but we needed a Black woman here, or we needed a poet here, or we needed something here, so here we just want you this part, right? So like, and the way it sounds like you guys respond to that is by 1, refusing it, 2, still kind of continuing to do your work and creating the spaces where that work can flourish, right? And can grow. And then also by being really alert and attentive to the ways in which people respond to you, right? Like this, it's not going over your head. You're like, okay, I see what's happening here. I'm about to nip this in the bud real quick. You might be nice about it, or you might be like, whatever. I guess it depends on the situation, right? But this is how you're doing that, which I think is really helpful. And I just wanted to kind of sum that up a little bit, because I think that's really helpful to think about, right? Like, what are people experiencing? And then how are they responding to it, right? Because none of you are not doing what you do. Like, you're all doing what you do, and you continue to do what you do, right? Despite the different ways in which people might devalue or underestimate, right? Like who you are and what you bring. I wanted to go back to the quiet point because I felt like, because I felt like we didn't really we need to let that breathe a little bit and kind of actually get into that. And so actually I was really interested in both Sadie and Asha talking about your grandmothers. And I wonder if you have like a specific example of what her conflict resolution or her leadership looked like, right? And if you need a second to think about that, I could do whatever, but I was interested because I think that, because I wasn't trying to say, I wasn't trying to like hate on the grandmas, because I love grandmas, right? So that wasn't the point. But I was just thinking about, just for me, and maybe I'll just be more biographical here, right? Like the women that raised me, right? The Muslim women that raised me were not quiet women, right? They were very active in the Muslim community. They were institution builders, right? And they got a lot of flack. They got a lot of blocks, like, but they were still very much committed to community, right? So there are like imams you all love that I can't stand, right? That like, my mother, and they would still work with these brothers today. I don't hear nothing from them, right? But because they were invested in the community in that way, right? Like they're still doing that, right? But they weren't quiet women. And because they weren't quiet women, they got a lot of flack for it. So that's how I respond to that. Not because I think like, there isn't, because I think ideally what would happen is that women like men, can be all kinds of people, right? They can act in all kinds of ways and find their spaces, right? But there are these expectations around femininity versus masculinity that are really sort of unrealistic and toxic, right? That then sort of put women in particular kinds of, well, you can only do this and that kind of thing. So that's kind of how I responded to that. But I wanted to open the space up because I actually feel like I'm not saying that we shouldn't, you want to shut that down. So I was thinking, well, can you maybe tell us, like, what did that look like? Like, in that context for your grandmas.
Did you want to jump in, or do you want me to jump in first?
I mean, you can jump in and I'll jump after you. It's fine. Either or.
Okay, cool. So I think for me, someone made a comment. I think it may have been Layla in the chat. I'm like 95% sure. She made a comment after your comment, Dr. Saad, where you said about quiet leadership, because that's not really, kind of how it was modeled to me. Layla said, I believe something along the lines of, a lot of it can go back to cultural upbringing or cultural standards or norms, or also the safety in which the sort of environment that you are undertaking that leadership, the cultural factors at play, and also the conditioning. I'm not discounting that at all, that there is some level and form of conditioning, especially in different cultural contexts, different time periods too, generationally. I'm sure anybody's grandma here, whether American born and raised or Africa born and raised, there's definitely generation cultural gap for sure. Like, I know a lot of the grannies I grew up with that were not of like my direct grandma, but let's say other cultures that I grew up with in the masjid, they're kind of similar to my grandma in a lot of ways. And even though my grandma was, born in Somalia in the 1930s, there's a lot of aunties or grannies that I grew up with in my masjid that are, from South Carolina and the Georgia, and that are like born and raised in, Jim Crow era, or before that era. And I feel like there is kind of that sort of similar sort of temperament and kind of like very like wholesome and very grounded, but that's not the case for everybody. And I know that, and I don't think that being vocal and being dominant takes away from being wholesome at all either. At the same time, I feel like even my mom compared to my grandma are two very radically different people. And I feel like my grandma, maybe it's the generation, maybe it was just her temperament or personality, but sort of the way that she led was in style. And it was like, if it's sort of like, even if it's community or local level conflict, like, are there other ways to have this conversation that isn't going directly to escalation? And I just feel like it could have been a personality and a cultural sort of way of being. But where my mom also grew up and born in Somalia, she was the type to go to protest back home, type to be against the government, type to be at jail saying, let this person out. This person didn't commit a crime. Like, this person's a freedom fighter. Like, my mom's a pretty loud person, anybody who knows her. And, she would go to the hold programs at the mosque. Our house was constantly open. She would debate with men and say, this is not my opinion. It's not my view. This is not what's good for our community. So that's mom and daughter. They're radically different, but, and they have their own styles of leadership. But I think I just sort of liken more, I think somewhere in the middle, maybe. I feel like I have a little bit of the fiery side of my mom and a little bit of the, all right, let me take a step back, let me take a deep breath, and let me kind of take the graceful approach to this. So I think it's just the way that I've sort of meshed those two examples in my life.
Yeah. So for me, like I was saying earlier, the analogy of the neck was not the analogy of you being quiet, right? You have women societies, we have men societies, everybody have a role. Within the Nyominka, we are all, coming from the same root, right? And everybody know their role. Then you have Islam, right? And Islam brought a lot of patriarchy into my cultural space. Then we had to learn how to negotiate that. And being the neck is not being the quiet one. My grandma, Mama Busura, is not quiet. Mama Ami Busurai did not wait for people to tell her what was the right for her land. When she took over her land and decided to do whatever she wanted to do with it, she didn't ask for permission. You know, she had to confer. She would confer with the society of, right? That's what it is. My mom, don't talk is not loud, but my mom always exert that strength of somebody who is doing some type of martial arts. So that's the strength type of strength that she has. And her leadership go through that. You cannot tell nothing to my mom. She's not going to do only what she wants to do. She's not going to argue with you about it. She's not going to try to make a point. She's not even going to try to make you buy into what she wants to do. She's just going to go ahead and do what she has to do, period. And it's like, I come from a society where you go through rite of passages and it has required stuff to be done. And they have decided, oh, she's going to go through rite of passage, but this part of the rite of passage, we are not going to implement to her. And we're going to keep on moving. And this is not going to take away anything from who she is and how she has to represent herself, right? So I am louder than both of those. And I always smile because when I hear people talking about what my grandma was doing when she was young, I always just like, oh, yes, I didn't fell far from no tree. This is not something new. When I hear people telling my grandma's story, the first time I showed up at my village with my head all shaved up and stuff like that, I went to the village to see my grandma, and then she started laughing. Then they pulled an old picture of her where she had literally a mohawk. This is Senegal. We are in the water. And I was like, what? And she said, oh, you think you're doing something? Let me show you. And I was so shocked because I have never, ever seen my grandma in that. But then looking into archival pictures, you see all these women in Senegal who had all kind of shaved head and shaped hairstyle that are not what you see today, right? So I'm like, oh, okay, so this is not something new. This is something that we have left. We have come out of our ways to maybe, meet different type of beauty standard today, right? So, oh, okay, this is not actually weird as other would want me to know. This is not feminine. So I always, it's always like a conversation. We are 3 girls, 5 brothers in the house. And we always laugh about, there's a lot of conflict happening, but it never comes from the girls. And it's always an adjustment in our household between the men and the boys and the girls as we're growing up, even today as adults. And then we always go back to my mom and laugh at the fact that we are in continuous adjustment between those two types of society that have been put on the top of each other. And how do we navigate it? Because everything is matrilineal. We continue with our matriarchal, and then we have to navigate now with this patriarchy and what it says. And if I pull out my cultural self, I would say that my Muslim part is more patriarchal than my cultural self, like literally. Because within the culture, everybody plays the role that they have to play. It's not who is in front, who is behind. It's about what are we going to do for this to work. It's only when we start putting what we were told was Muslim values, that now this patriarchy is creating problem. Then you have to add into that the whole layer of the other colonization, right? With the other gaze of the Caucasian people that have an idea of what we are supposed to be. So when I'm doing something, you coming and telling me that I am being subdued. Who said that? There is no gender in my language. There is no he and she. But in the French language, the door is genderized. The table is genderized. You apply gender even to inanimated stuff. So the whole conversation about gender role and stuff like that is not for me to take on. Because in my traditional Syrian language, I don't have genders. We don't say he's, hers, and that it doesn't exist. So when I speak English, my daughter is always correcting me because after so many years, I still mix the he and she, the hers, and blah, blah, blah. And she's always like rolling her eyes like, Mom, Would you get it? No, I won't get it because I still think in my traditional language, and in that language, we don't have those issues. And for me,
Sadie, does your tribe adopt? I'm willing to be an adoptee.
Mama, come on. In my ethnic group, you can come in. You can bring and come with us every day.
It's funny, Sadie, what you were saying reminded me of something I've been thinking about too. Like I remember once, probably 20 years ago now, there was this Black US American scholar who gave a talk about something, I forget. And I went to ask him a question, like I questioned him, and he was like, he said to me, and it was funny, the audacity. He was like, he said to me something like, well, would you have questioned the prophet? Something like that, he said to me, right? And I was thinking, and it was funny because I was like, well, and I remember responding to him being like, well, Salama, you know that ayah in the Quran, right? Where it's like the one that says, for the believing men and women and, all that, the men and women ayah, right? That comes out because she questioned the prophet and was like, why is God not talking about us like God is talking about the men, right? Like this is what actually happened. He's like, oh yeah, right, my bad. But you reminded me of that because of this question of patriarchy, right? That you're saying, right? You're like what your community, what your ethnic group was taught were Muslim values, were patriarchal ones, right? And I'm interested in like what people think about this question of patriarchy and leadership and being women and this kind of thing, because each of you are coming from a different context, related, right, but different, right? And so how do you think about those things in terms of the work you do as Muslim women? I guess some of the things that Sadie brought up, I'd be interested in what do you guys think, or or does it sound the same, or do you think it's different, or where do you fall? Was that not a clear question, or was that too big a question? Because you're all looking at me like.
I think that when Europeans introduce words and we get our tongues all twisted up trying to get them out and redefine and extend definitions, we get messed up. Just a comment.
I think I just want to jump in here really quickly. I think as a Black Muslim woman, as a Black woman, as a Black woman leader, I've always had these conversations, this is struggle, whether it's 30 years ago, whether it's today, that as Black Muslim women, as Black women in this country, we have to struggle for our community as a whole. And we have to, I'm saying navigate, but there's always a challenge. And what I've seen, whether you're in the Black Power movement or whether you're in Black Muslim community, there's a desire from some people for us to take a back seat and allow men to lead because they have not been allowed to lead in this country. And there has been a struggle that I've had to confront, that I've had many conversations about, well, why do we have to have that struggle? Why do we have to take a back seat? And it's just this constant, and I forget your question now, but there's this constant tension, as far as community first, women first. How are we navigating sexism with patriarchy, sexism within our own community, whereas Black Muslim, Black community as a whole, as we are experiencing, racism and sexism in this country. So that's something that I've given a lot of thought to. I've had, I've challenged it within myself, within my home, within my community in different spaces as well. I forget your question, but that's something that just kind of popped up.
Yeah, no. I mean, the question really wasn't, it was really just thinking about this question of, and so patriarchy was the word that Sadie used, right? This, this idea that, kind of like leadership, power, right? These kind of things should lie within people who are male, right? Like that's basically patriarchy is, right? And whether or not that's something, and she talked about the imposition of that on her matriarchal culture, right? Back home through Islam, right? Like this is what Islam was taught as, was this kind of way, right? And so I was just interested, and I've had experiences with that as well, right? In a different context, right? That sort of people presuming Islam has a particular kind of perspective around that, right? And so I was just wondering if that resonated or not with other people. So that's all. So you were fine.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have lots of thoughts and emotions around just that navigating, Black women, Black Muslim women, Black community, I'll just stop there and just engage with people's comments, because I have a lot of thoughts around that. And that's an area of tension for me, as well as our role within leadership, our role within power movements, our role within advocating for our community, whether it's domestically or whether it's globally as women, and also just, fighting racism in general.
Yeah, I'll say I think there's a really interesting way in which Black people in particular, and definitely Black women, are trapped in someone else's imagination battle. We didn't say we wanted to be a part of this, but we are. And so like consistently engaging the complexity of what it means to be a Black woman, or the complexity of what it means to be a Black Muslim woman, and then like the perception of what that's supposed to look like. We're constantly navigating this myth of womanhood, and really even this myth of leadership. And so I think even when we're talking about leadership in women, there's still almost this framing of like, can we lead? Or like, what happens if someone like tries to prevent you from like leading? And although that, like, that's a real thing, I also feel like as long as we're like associated.
Did Rashida freeze for y'all?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And she was really getting into it too. Well, in the chat, and actually I want to say, I have like a couple more questions, but I do want to invite people who are in the audience, if they have questions you want to ask to our esteemed panel, to definitely drop those in the chat.
Oh.
But will you want to say something, say? No. Yes or no? Okay, I think Rashida's gonna be coming back, but there was two things in the chat. So one was a rhetorical thought. America Harris says, why is there a question of male leadership whenever the thought of women leading comes up? Why the remembrance of what men need when women voice their concerns? So that's one sort of rhetorical question. Oh wait, are you speaking,
Angelica? Angelica has her hand up.
Yes, no, okay. And then there was a question to me, are you asking about the predominant patriarchal interpretation of Islam? Yeah, I was basically trying to sort of find, and I think we heard some of that from Harriet and some of that from Rashida, about whether or not this question of patriarchy as a way of like what Islam teaches us about men and women is something other people have experienced, right? In their own sort of lives, in their own context. So that really was the question there.
Can I add something, Saad? I think it's, and this is going along with what Amira said in the chat, it's exhausting to have to continually try to assert my personhood as a woman and my capabilities as a leader anytime we talk about women in leadership, because men don't do that. The conversation is always a nascent conversation that never allows itself to mature and progress beyond this basic, like, see us, hear us, validate us, because men don't have these kinds of conversations. And I've been privy to conversations about male leadership. It's like we're always fighting to be seen. And then when we do have discussions, we're always, there's inevitably always something that comes up about, but what about the men? And it's like, of course, it's sort of like the statement, Black Lives Matter. There's an unspoken too. There's an unspoken also that exists. If we're talking about women in leadership, of course we acknowledge the importance of healthy male leadership, but too often, and not in this space, because I think this is a very generative discussion, but I think so often when it comes to women's leadership in Islam, in the church, in the Black community, it's always, well, should we? Well, but we have to consider our brothers and what they've been through. So at what point are we allowed to humanize our condition? At what point are we allowed to struggle both together with our brothers and struggle against the things that are keeping us at odds? That's what I'm thinking about. And I have to go back, because I didn't mention this at first. Rabia, our sister from the Nation of Islam, shout out to the Nation of Islam. people can say whatever they want to say about the nation, but the way that the nation constructs social interaction between women and men, the way the nation has created a platform for the nurturing and development of female leadership is something that the larger Muslim community needs to interrogate, because for decades, I have seen it, for decades, the Nation of Islam has been a vanguard in terms of healthy social gender interaction at the leadership level. And that's something that we as Muslims, we just throw everything away. Well, no, I ain't down with all that stuff. Listen, let me tell you something, baby. When I say the nation has it together in that regard, they do. There's a structure of accountability. And I have been in conversations with the Nation of Islam where they are talking about leadership, and this gender dynamic is touched on, but they don't allow themselves to dwell there, because they have allowed, as a larger community, they have allowed themselves to move beyond the conversation and put some structural barriers in there to this damaging level of marginalization that we continue to experience as women. So I just had to say that because I think it comes up often. I love this discussion that we're having, but that's why I was over here just amening as you were reading the comment, because I was like, yes, yes. So sorry.
Rabia?
Thank you so much for that, sis. Right. So, our culture speaks to and defines the position of the woman. And that's where I got that's why that co-pilot thing resonated with me when I looked up the word leadership. But I do want to quote great Nation of Islam leader, may Allah be pleased with her, Muhammad, who when I was just, I was trying to figure out how am I going to be part of this esteemed panel, but this is a quote that she gave in an interview about the role of leadership of women. And I'm trying to relate it to the patriarchy question, the dominant. And she says that Islam, like Christianity and Judaism, all of which are necessary for the enlightenment of humanity, all suffer from a similar affliction of being overly male dominant, even when it comes to interpretation of scripture. And I just want to put a note in that and say that one of the developmental actions that's part of my leadership story is Amina Wadud's book, Quran and Woman. When I learned that in Arabic, sister was talking about the absence or the presence of gendered nouns and how that affects the interpretation or the transliteration of Quran. So that's another discussion. But anyway, Ava is saying, as the world becomes more conscious and the internet and other things level the playing field of knowledge, that's what is key. What do we know about who we are as Allah's creations? And I think I'm just going to stop there. But I think the more we focus on who we are as Allah's creations, the easier it is to navigate these questions that we have around male leadership and female leadership. And thank you, beloved, for your shout out to us. We ain't perfect, but we working on it.
Alhamdulillah. No, thank you. There was a comment
We
in
need the MGT leadership model, inshallah. We need to get the sisters not in the nation, have a little bit of strength training, a little bit of leadership. So I definitely second that comment, Sister Angelica.
There was a point in the chat by Iman Williams that said we need to redefine leadership because our understanding of what it means is colonial and defined by whiteness. And they also said I could be wrong though, but I feel like that has come through in some of the comments people have said. I think Rashida, and hopefully she'll join us again, I think she talked about this idea of collaboration, right? I think Harriet talked about this idea of, leadership is about building up other people, right? And I think also, I think many people talked about this idea of that servant leadership model, right? So that you are the leader, so to speak, right? You're taking the lead in something, but it's not as a singular kind of, you're not trying to dominate. You're not trying to sort of rule over, you're not trying to sort of tell people what to do, but rather you are kind of responding to a particular need that matches your interests, right? And you're looking to sort of be in this, to push things in a particular kind of way, right? And so I feel like I see that in what each of you already do, and even how you described initially your leadership story, right? I think in this times of, I think sort of buttressing against that thing.
Am I not here?
Oh, there you are. Okay. No,
Like,
no, you literally were not on my screen until just now. You didn't get to finish your point. Did you want to finish that point?
yeah, I'll just say I feel like we're often, while saying that women have historically and continue to lead, we're still often like holding men up as the standard. Like it's like natural for them to do it. And when women do it, it's like out of the ordinary. And so I think that aspect of patriarchy and just the history of it, we even find ourselves having conversations where it's like, well, I'm not silent, right? Or like, I don't fit this, or I'm loud. And like this myth of like how you're supposed to exist as a woman, one, it needs to stop. But I think like we need to do that necessary work of like even undoing that, because we end up having conversations from that space as if like there's one or two ways to be and there's nothing else in the middle, which is absolutely not true. And I think the second thing, I totally agree with the comment about leadership, and I did share something about that earlier. I think it's really important for us to think deeply about if your leadership is even needed. I will say that I feel like we're fixated on that. We're fixated on someone being in charge. And even in this, granted, we're talking about women, but I even want to insert like younger folks into this conversation. So it's not like men or women and like no one else. But more importantly, as we're doing community work, does it require a leader, or does it require someone or a group of people to organize folks to do the work that's necessary? You don't always have to be in charge. And I think that we assume that, and we assume that leadership looks a particular way, like telling other people what to do or taking the credit for their work. And that needs to stop. I think there's just a whole framework of leadership that we need to push back on. And it's something that's a little deeper than having a conversation about it, but really sort of figuring out what our practices are to move us forward to get to that place. I think when we're talking about Black Muslim women in particular, there's absolutely nothing, especially, I would say globally, but also in like the history of the US, there's nothing that any Black Muslim woman did by herself. Even if she like started a thing, all the other sisters came and like helped her. Like, we have images of like sisters coming together and like sewing uniforms for their students at Sister Khan Muhammad School because folks didn't have money for a uniform or how they wanted this uniform to look. They couldn't just go to Sears and take that off the rack. Like people have done what's necessary as a group. And I think that we're like in this space where we keep having to have this divide of who's going to be in charge and who are the people who are going to be the followers. And I personally think a lot of that has to do with the hierarchy that seems to exist within this faith practice of needing to be led by someone. And also like the hierarchy of romanticizing our past. I think folks are always talking about, we need another Malcolm. May Allah bless him and his legacy. But like Malcolm was able to do what he did also because other people were behind him doing the work. Like there was a collective there. You could say we need another Malcolm. We also could say we need you to get up and do something. Those are two completely different conversations. And I think that we need to focus more on the latter of like, what is the thing that you can contribute? You don't need to be brilliant. You don't need to be an amazing speaker, but you actually do need to do something to move us forward.
So that brings me to a question that also came up from when I had asked folks online, and they were asking like, what advice would you give to someone who is wanting to take on a leadership role? And so, and I had a hard time with that, actually trying to figure out how to word the question, because I was like, you usually don't want leadership, or like if you want leadership, it's probably, I don't know, you're kind of like, why do you want to be the leader, But I feel like the question was saying like, what if you're this person who like, you see a problem, right? Like you see there's some issue, there's something happening and you want to do something about it, right? And so whether or not you become the person who's in charge of it or not, but you want to respond, right? You see a need in your community, you see a need in the world, you want to respond to it. So I guess thinking about it that way, right? Like what advice would you give to people like that? So I see, say at my local community, I don't know, the young people need, I don't know, sports activities. I don't know, whatever. I mean, but I see a need, right? I see a need in the community. I want to respond to it. So what advice would you give a person like that? A person who sees a need in their local space, they know they want to respond to it, but they don't know where to start or what to do. Like, what kind of advice might you give them?
I think it's important to ask people what they need. Ask the people what they need. Then let them guide you, because you have to be almost like a shepherd. The shepherd isn't at the front of their flock. The shepherd follows the flock where they go. So you have to ask the young people what it is that they need, because it can be the exact opposite of what you think.
Rabia?
But I also think, I agree with that, Angelica, but I also think you should just get up and start working toward trying to fill the need. Your observation of a gap is there for a reason. And if not you, who?
Really resonate with both of the comments, because for me, that's what happened. There was a gap. I fell into the gap, and I had to find a place to put a cushion in it so that nobody else is going to put their foot in that gap. And there was also this conversation of saying, hey, if I cannot have enough concrete, who else have concrete so we can make sure this hole is being patched? And as we're trying to patch this hole, to figuring out in my community, what are other needs that was there? Because it's not about what I think their needs is, because sometimes we think we know where they want to go, but then as we have more conversation, we find out that no, that's not what they want. They want something else. And then we start figuring out how that something else can be brought up and made an issue that we have to organize around. So there is the larger narratives, but there is also the reality of, okay, I don't want lavender because I'm allergic to it. So don't welcome me in your house by spraying lavender. If you don't know that I don't like lavender, I'm allergic to it, you're going to spray lavender in your house and give me some silk sheets. And I will walk out as the good Senegalese that I am. I won't say anything. And I will choke to death and wake up in the morning and have hives, because I was brought up not to, disparage your welcoming. But then, like I tell to my community all the time, nobody can welcome you if they don't know that you don't eat pork. Right. So you have to be able to open your mouth and say, I don't eat pork or whatever, so that if they are really about creating a welcoming space for you, they can take that in consideration.
Right.
Dr. Aldine, you have your hand raised?
It is. It's only because our pretty scroll is down for a minute.
I was like, you haven't raised your hand this whole time.
Hey, I've been here just, messing around. But I guess my question is, do you all know each other? If you don't, why don't you? Why are women in leadership not supportive of one another? Angelica should not have had to face any kind of, I can't say what I want to say. Any kind of, give me a word. Come on, Sue. Backlash from the community, because women who are also running businesses, being a poet or whatever, Sadia should have whipped out a poem that kicked butt. Why is that not what's happening here?
Is that not what's happening? So you're asking?
Well, I think it's happening here, and I'm sure it's happening in other spaces. But as a slightly older person, I want to make sure that my granddaughters know who you are. Everybody doesn't have to reinvent the wheel, but they should go and be a spoke in some good wheels. They ought to be able to look to you for guidance. Guidance doesn't always come from mom or grandma, right? Because they're whatever it is they say about us. But If I know that Sadia or Rashida or Harriet is somebody I can go talk to, I will. About career choices, about all of those things.
Right.
So
Sadia?
do you know each other? Let me get off.
Can I say something? I just have to say, they got my back. The only sisters that I'm meeting for the first time are Rabia and Harriet. But me and Asha, we done banged some Bahur and some Unti with a brick outside a hotel, right? Sadia, I meet with Sadia regularly. I have reached out to both Suad and Rashida about frustrations. They have had my back. So yeah, but I think that's the thing, right? Some of them have husbands who are also part of what I consider like my little private goon squad, who will literally run up in an inbox if they see somebody say something the wrong way. We do
Are
have
you
each other.
serious?
Listen, let me tell you. A brother came at me sideways on Instagram in a Instagram live. I didn't see the comment, but I did not know about it until a brother popped up in my inbox, very well-known brother in the Muslim community. He popped up in my inbox and he said, "Assalamu alaikum, sis. I just want to let you know I handled that lightweight for you." And I'm thinking like, what are you talking about? And he sent me a screenshot of a message that he had sent to the brother who had disrespected me. So we know each other. We just want everybody else we just want to not to have to stand in the gap for each other in that way.
No, I think I'm using you because I'm looking at you. But
okay, well, I just wanted to know because I don't want them texting me later and saying, "We don't have your back."
No, but I'm talking about. I mean, Dr. Suad's book comes out, and I saw the video. Well, I saw it in person, and she's dancing, and I'm saying, "Oh my gosh, she can still bend like that." And then I'm looking at Amina, who got coerced in many ways, but she's a Quranic scholar, into leading a prayer. I'm looking at all of this stuff that comes back on women, right? And some way or the other, they got to know you arrived. One of the chats says sometimes, let me see if I can.
So Sister Dr. Aldine, we got Sadia wants to jump in on this. Go ahead, Sadia.
I have a lot of thoughts on this because I feel like there is a lost art of community that we really don't have. And I will always tip my hat off to Auntie because I feel like she is trying to make sure that, especially like my generation, I'm 25, we still have that. We still have those aunties. And honestly, for me, I feel like there's a myriad of reasons why we don't know each other anymore and we don't commune with each other. And a lot of it boils down to capitalism. A lot of it boils down to my aunties are at work. You know what I'm saying? They don't have the time to come over and braid my hair no more because they got to do a double shift. They don't have the time to sit with me and help me with my Quran because they got to drop their kids off, go over here, like, for example, right? Like my oldest sister, that's my girl. That's my rock. Shout out to Amira. And we're having such a disconnect because she's always working. She's a doula. So her money is contractual. It's based on contracts. And it's like, I miss being able to just sit and talk about absolutely nothing. What we just watched last week, who's getting on our nerves. We're like, all these different things. I don't have that anymore because I'm working full time. She's working full time. We see each other when we can. We'll FaceTime here and there. But I really feel like a lot of our communities back in the day, and Rashida was talking about romanticizing communities back in the day, how it's translated to us is as if a lot of the women of that time had that time. Right? I remember my dad was talking about, he used to walk home from school. He was like, this is something that, like, for my kids, I have a 3-year-old. My dad was talking about being 5 doing this. I would have a major anxiety attack if this happened. But he was talking about walking home from school at 5 years old and everybody on the block knew who he was and who he belonged to. And he always had to say hi to Mr. So-and-so and Mrs. So-and-so because they all knew that he was Yahya and Sakina's son. And if he deviated from his route home, somebody was going to report that back to my grandparents, right? We don't have that anymore. We really don't. I think there's multiple reasons why, but I really see that a lot of it boils down to capitalism, boils down to the fact that the cost of living continues to rise, and the wages don't. And every single person in the household, every single elder in the household now, I mean, my grandmother is in her 80s. She turned 80 this year. She's still working. She's still working.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, but I don't think, Sadia, that we had an easier time. We all worked. We made times with the girls had sleepovers. Lots of different things happen because we're in a community of strangers.
But I want to jump in, and I see Sadie too. I think about this too. I'm always saying I'm going to write this article or something called "The Bourgeoisification of Black Islam." That's my title. Don't take it. But because I do, my mother was a single parent. She worked. She had 35 jobs, right? But she also was in 34 organizations, right? Like all New York City knew Amina Haq. Like wasn't, you know what I mean? Like this kind of thing, right? And so I think it wasn't that people weren't working, but I do think you're right. I agree about wages and time, but also I think about, we all lived in Brooklyn. We can't live in Brooklyn now, right? You live like 10 minutes, like who here lives near each other? Like I think I live near, relatively near, I guess maybe Sadie, maybe. You know what I'm saying? So I do think, I think it's, I appreciate that, because I think just thinking about how things have changed, both in terms of things we have control over, like as individuals, as communities, and those things that are larger, kind of like systemic social forces that shape our options, right? Sadie, and then Asha, and then Rashida.
Yeah, so about the stranger thing. So I don't have, when I came here, there is no mom, dad, so I don't have that background. But I was lucky to fall into a community where I have a mom and a dad. So I'm in Detroit, but I have mom and dad, I have aunties and stuff like that. And single mother for 14 years of my daughter's, life. The thing that I had to learn to teach her was that our neighbor was not a stranger. I'm not from here, they don't speak my language, but they are not a stranger, because back home, your neighbor is not a stranger. So, and if I wanted to be effective, I needed for my neighbors to know me and know my child so that they can take care or pick up if something happened. So that if I leave her at the house and then something happens, she can knock to the neighbor's door, right? That is not Senegalese, might not even be Muslim, and so on and so forth. Because that is something that I kept when I came, and I found ways to implement that. So we knew all the people in the neighborhood. We knew the person who sit in front of the gas station. I know them by name. I can say, hey, what you doing today, right? I'm never gonna try to say, oh, you are a stranger. Because I told my daughter, when that house burned, because you never acknowledge that child, you never acknowledge that man, you never acknowledge so on and so forth, you treat them as strangers, well, they're not gonna come to your rescue. And I think that within the community that we are, with everything that you have named, Rabia, is that there is also this idea of, what am I accepting? Am I accepting you to tell me this person is dangerous, or am I going to create a space for me where my neighbors are not dangerous? I might not partake to their lifestyle, but they are not a danger to me. And for having lived in some of the not nice part of Detroit at all, because of economics, right? Because of not having the means, right? Because of, being a single mom with no income, I had learned to make a community out of those neighborhoods, regardless of what it is, because I need it for myself and Howland to be safe. And I could not be in an environment where I was not going to be safe. So building that community was important, acknowledging those people was important, and making sure that that community life continue. And then, yes, our lives are busy, but it's up to us to also create that space where, we can see each other, where, we can drive together to work and fuss about this and that, or where bring my child and my grandson to work so that we can still do work and I still can be a grandma. And I think we have those capacities. It's just that if we're gonna push back against capitalism, we also have to push back against those systems or abiding to those systems all the time. And anytime that we can, push those doors down, then push it down and create that space that is working for us and our communities and our safety and sanity.
Thank you. Asha.
Thank you. I kind of wanted to loop back around really quickly to the original question you asked, if that's okay, Dr. Saad,
Yeah,
about if you see a need or something in the community that you want to address, but don't know quite how to get your hands in there, or how to step into leadership. I think the first thing that popped into my mind when I heard that question is kind of like this, like a little uncomfortable feeling, because it's like, I don't really think anyone wakes up and says like, oh, I want to be in leadership. I feel like it's kind of a strange concept and framework. It's like, how do you choose to want to lead people? I don't think it's a choice. Like, I really just think that, like the way Sadie said, and Rashid and a few other people, is that, there's that need, there's that gap. It's often collective, like 99.9% of the time, it's something that is a collective process. It's something that you find yourself in, not always at the helm, but somewhere in the center, somewhere on the side, somewhere, just kind of floating. I don't think it's this linear, hierarchical process. I don't think there needs to be a set director, a set co-director, a set, co-lead. I really do think that it is first and foremost, like you said, seeing that there is some issue or some sort of gap. And then after that, the second thing I personally would do is reach out to folks to try and do something similar to a listening tour. I mean, not exactly in that way. I know not everybody's like nonprofit lingo or whatever, but like figuring out what actually is needed and like talking to people like, did you notice this thing? Like, I kind of noticed this is missing, but I'm not sure it's even a thing. Like, let's figure out if we want to get all of our energy and time invested in this issue without even knowing that it's actually missing. So I think that's number two. And then the third thing that I would do after that is figure out what my strengths are. What can I actually contribute to this gap or issue area? How can I contribute to this? Am I an IT expert? Am I a public speaker? Am I a nurse? What's my background? Am I a student? Like, what can I already contribute that Allah has gifted me, or that I have spent my time and energy or my educational experience in obtaining this resource or skill set? And like really gauging how much time and energy I have to contribute that skill set, and then reach out to other folks who've noticed this gap in the community and trying to elicit their support and what their strengths are in addressing this issue. And then the fourth thing that I would do is also reach out to the youth in the community who may most likely be the recipients of this service or program, and also should be at the helm of the leadership and should be co-leaders or co-conspirators in this program in the first place. Most of this time, it's usually helping youth or those are vulnerable in community. And so I think those are the things that I would do first, is figure out if it's really an issue, talk to folks in the community, figure out what you can do as a contributing member, gauge how much of that time and effort that you have, and then also enlist the youth in that project/program. That's how I would
Look at you, organizer. Look at you, organizer.
I try to hold it in, but I'm like, maybe there's a youth, person in the audience who's interested or who's not doing this already, but that's kind of how I would tackle it.
Thank you. Rashida, did you still want to comment? Or
Yes. Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay, my internet's being a little weird. Yeah, all of this is resonating with me. As someone who's currently living in Senegal, I think almost every other day I'm reminded of Black communities in the US. Just sort of like the freedom and safety that I feel like children have and the way that folks look out for each other. I do think that I don't per se think that that's completely absent from the US, but I don't feel like I have that closeness in my own community when I am in the States. But something that I've been asking folks and that I want to insert in this space, and folks can answer it or just sort of like think about it, is like, who taught you how to be in community? Because it's just something that I've been thinking about a lot lately and sort of like asking other folks, because I think we're in this space, rightly so, where we have a lot of critiques of American Muslim communities and American Muslim leadership. And folks can spend all day unpacking those things. And I think that like unpacking it and having conversations is interesting and it's important and it's necessary to craft space for that. But when we're sort of bringing in, I think, these examples of folks who were able to craft communities before us, it's like we almost forget that it was labor, that it was work, it was a commitment, it was exhausting. Folks sacrificed things and they had a mutual commitment to create what they needed to like fill in the gaps. And so there's a list of like what's missing and what we're frustrated with and what folks are exhausted of. But I think this idea of like, who taught you how to be in community? Like, who taught you how to be in community with imperfect beings? What does it mean to like establish community? And all the things that we say, like we're missing, or we would like those things back. Like, what are we willing to give? And what are we willing to do to establish those things? A decision was made. It did just like fall out of the sky. And I feel like we all want something, but like that space to actually to do it or to connect with other folks to make it happen. When we get to that place, there seems to be silence.
I guess people are like, they're taking that in. Yeah, I mean, I think, I think that's an interesting, I like that suggestion, Rashida, about thinking about that, because I was thinking about what I had said earlier, sort of pithily, about how the men in the community that my mother and her cohort would still work with that I can't stand, but like this idea of, kind of why they did that, right? And what lessons there might be, for someone like me who's like, I ain't got time for y'all. You know what I'm saying? In terms of, in terms of that kind of thing, I'm very active in different kind of community, different kinds of ways, but I have certain lines in the sand that they didn't, right? And maybe there's something about that to consider, right? Like, well, what is that about? And should the lines change, like for me or not? You know what I mean? Type of thing. So that's a great way to think about it. Does anyone want to respond to that, or we want to just let that marinate?
Well, I think there's also this phenomenon of women who transition to Islam, who are very skilled and knowledgeable in whatever it is they do, now having to, so to speak, get to the back of the bus. Because there's no place for them as counselors or psychiatrists or all of the other things that communities desperately need. Just a comment.
We have about 10 minutes left for our conversation today. There was one last question that came through the group. So I guess there are two things I wanted to sort of put out there. So one, I appreciated Dr. Aldean's question around, do we know each other? I mean, I think I actually know everybody here, but Sadia not as well. But I think this idea about how can we know each other better? So I don't necessarily think that we don't know each other or we're not supportive of each other per se, but maybe we don't know each other well, or well enough to sort of, have kind of deeper bonds, you know what I mean, than kind of just like a name on a screen type of thing. So I guess there are two questions I'm gonna throw out, sort of one building kind of off what Rashida was saying in this conversation, and one that came from some of the audience. So one is like, what are the kinds of ways you think that we can know each other better in light of everything, right, that we're dealing with, right? The distances, the capitalism, the patriarchy, the attitudes, the egos, et cetera. You know what I mean? Like, what are some ways we might be able to know each other better so we can be, sort of in closer community and more supportive of each other? And the other question was, what are some self-care practices for Black Muslim and community work? Like, and just think about your own experience. Like, what are some of the things that you do to take care of yourself as you do the work of taking care of others? Because that's what all y'all are doing. You know what I mean? So, so those are two questions. So one, what are some ways or some things we can think about doing so we can kind of know each other better? And what are things that we should be doing to take care of ourselves? So I'm gonna throw those out there, and whichever one you want to respond to.
I think I can answer both, maybe. So it's interesting that Sadie was bringing up like going through rites of passage, and I went through rites of passage with Auntie. And I think kind of like tapping back into a lot of those practices to ensure that we have community, that we know each other, because rites, like something like a rites of passage, it's not just like you walk in with a name tag that says, hello, my name is, right? And then we have this like icebreaker, and then you get 3 truths and a lie, and now you know 2 truths about me type of thing. It's continuous work that has to do specifically with building yourself and with building your community around you. So tapping back into some of those things, even just like as a writer, I have like groups of friends, and we just get on Zoom or FaceTime or something, and we don't even talk. We just sit for an hour and write, right? And that's like a level of like accountability, because some of us had deadlines and editors and things like that, right? But it's also just like a sense of community, and we don't even have to share like, oh, this is what I'm writing or whatever. At the end, it's like, everybody good? All right, see you next week. So getting back to making that like Rashida said, taking that work to make that time to do those things, to get back together in community with one another. Self-care practices, Lord. As a writer, I'm always going to say write. I have a permanent ban right now from my husband on notebooks, because I keep bringing home notebooks that are so cute and I never finish them. But I think writing for me, it didn't just come out of like sounds fun to do. And a lot of it came out of, I don't know how to say what I feel. I don't know how to feel understood. And writing from a position of, this doesn't even have to make sense. I just have to get it out of my mind. I may not be even able to read this because I'm writing so fast. I may not be able to read this back. I just have to get these thoughts and express these thoughts out of my mind. So yeah, those are my 2 for that question, those questions.
Thank you. Rabia.
So somebody said in the chat about MGT, and one of the things, there are lots of things that I like about being in my community, but one of the things is that there's a women's class that meets every week. And so as I'm thinking, and so we get to know the women in our class, in addition to other more formal meetings that are male and female. But as I'm thinking about that question, I'm wondering if there's a way, or maybe I should think about, how could we create a women's class, sort of like what this is. To me, this is the women's class. How can we do that on a regular basis? And like Sister said, it's work. You have to put the time in if we want the relationships to develop. I know that as I've been on my leadership journey, every time I meet somebody like all of you, it's my intention, may Allah help me to meet it, to continue to communicate with you, because I've learned so much about you that I want to talk in a less public kind of way, this, because there is an audience. So that's my answer. How can we create a global MGT class, for lack of a better word? And then
Go ahead, sorry.
Self-care. Yeah, I have to schedule it. I have to schedule it. And I think that's one of the pitfalls of, trying to do the work that we do with all of the other stuff that we have to do in maintaining, our homes and our families. I have a small book called Meditations for Women Who Do Too Much. And I've had it for a long time, and I have to sometimes, I have to go there sometimes. So we just have to do it. We have to take care of ourselves. We owe it to ourselves.
I'm just going to jump in here really quickly, selfishly. Can't figure out the self-care, still trying to figure that out. Someone who knows me pretty well, but has been in space with Angelica, told me like 2 years ago that we should connect. So I'm going to take this opportunity to find time to connect with Angelica. But then also Sadie, I saw one of your colleagues from New York with the visa on Democracy Now! Yesterday. My other half of my family, my husband and my kids are Haitian, and want to find a way to get and connect with the Haitian immigrants coming from the border in Chicago. So I want to talk to you offline on that. So that's my selfish connection action. Nice. As well.
Angelica, tell us about the class.
So first, I put something in the chat, and one of the things that I think encourages intimacy with women that I have not yet met, but who I have admired from afar. So all of you actually are names that I saw before, like I knew you, and I was like, how can I be her friend, right? So I think citing Black women and amplifying their work is a form of intimacy, especially in a space where we may not have someone's phone number, or we may not have opportunities to talk, but seeing like if Asha is doing something, or if Sadia is in her poetry is being recognized somewhere, like amplifying that and citing that, like saying the names of our sisters, and impressing upon people the importance of investigating their work. I see that as an act of intimacy. For me, one of the ways that I get closer to people is I find out what it is that they like and try to amplify that. So me and you, we talking about dance, we talk about music, we talk about people acting raggedy, right? Asha, every time I find some new like unsi or bahur, I'm like, I gotta save this for when I see my girl, right? Rashida, she'll just hit me like with a voice note, like out of the blue, that just speaks to something in my heart. And it might be months since the last time that I have spoken to her, but it's just like a balm. So I think that is important. And with the MGT, so I was never a member of the Nation of Islam, but being in the city of Detroit, I saw the power of organization. Growing up in the African-centered educational community, and in the African dance community, I saw the importance of rites of passage. And so I launched a class called Foundational Womanhood. And Foundational Womanhood is a 12-week class that really builds on rites of passage as well as women's training. We don't talk about relationships. We don't talk about marriage. We don't talk about hair. We don't talk about any of that. We talk about decolonizing our thought. We talk about what does it mean to be a sister. We talk about somatic movement as a way to heal ancestral trauma. I was late joining this because Maymuna Yusuf was teaching in my Foundational Womanhood class, and she did an impromptu songwriting class. Sis wrote a whole anthem, a whole entire anthem for the class, and it's global. There's no place that I can go that I don't have a sister who has gone through that rites of passage program there. And it really started just out of a need for me to be able to have community, because I'm very isolated where I am here in Phoenix. It's intergenerational, it's interfaith, it's intercultural. The youngest person who has ever gone through it was 19 years old. The oldest person who is going through it right now is 72 years old. So it's also an opportunity for us to have mirrors to look at. And I think that is something that we can do. So now we have, women who are in Detroit and Chicago, in Dakar, in Accra, who have these little groups. They've gone through this rites of passage program with me, but I'm not the center of the wheel. The sisterhood is the center. I always tell them, if I die tomorrow, this sisterhood will continue, because it's really not about me. It's about a collective us. And in terms of self-care, I make playlists. I'm from the stop, rewind, repeat, cassette tape, mixtape generation, and Spotify has made that so easy. So you tell me your genre, baby, it could be Zydeco. I'm gonna make you a playlist, okay? It could be, I'm making you a playlist. That's my love language, playlists and books. If you tell me that you like certain books, I will ask you for your address, and you might get a package on your door. Because giving gifts is my way of showing people that I love them, and outpouring love to others is a form of self-care for me.
Thank you. So I want to give opportunity for the, so who hasn't, so Asha and Sadie, right? Haven't responded yet, and Rashida. So, because we're running out of time, so I'm going to give, I just want you to, if you want to contribute, I want to open it up.
I'll just be super quick because I feel like the ladies really summed it up so well. I would just say for the self-care, I think that's a lifelong process. You learn, unlearn, relearn, find new things. You don't like things anymore. It doesn't work for you. But I really, in the last, like, I would say 5 to 10 years, have really been putting a lot of effort on learning about cultural ways of healing, natural ways of, you know, like finding time and space for myself. Like I would really ask elders in my community, the women in my community, like if I get time, I burn foh and unsi that Angelica was talking about, which is like different incense. They have healing properties, frankincense. It's part of like my cultural heritage and legacy. And I really think that it also has Islamic properties. So things like that, I try to like learn more about, and I invest in, and I use, and if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I try to take a few moments and make myself a cup of tea, and burn some frankincense, and do some dhikr, some salawat, and pray. And so I really think just trying to connect to that part of my ancestry and my culture has really helped me in terms of trying to stay grounded. So.
I can go really quickly. In terms of self-care, something I started doing several years ago was taking spiritual vacations. I think anyone who has taken a vacation knows that it can be amazing, but also exhausting. And so my spiritual vacations are not about seeing all the things. It's literally just about like chilling, or maybe being more intentional about making time to read, to study, to pray, to chill with a tree, anything that's going to rejuvenate my spirit. And during that time, thinking of some practices that I can take back with me when I return home that I can actually do, like not grand things, just really like simple, basic things that I can keep up with. And part of that list is also setting boundaries. I think typically boundaries for us are about like how we say no, or the line that we don't want people to cross. But boundaries for me in this context are like, what are the things that I need to put in my life, like as a boundary that protect the practice that I'm trying to carry out until I can get back to the next round of that spiritual vacation. So if I'm reading or relaxing early in the morning, letting people know, like, don't call me from this time to this time. Or telling my children, you have a second parent, you should use him. Whatever it is to protect that space, like taking that very seriously. And so like recognizing that that boundary is about protecting my spirit.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, Sadie?
Yeah, for my self-care, you know what I do on a weekly basis. I teach the African dance class.
Yes.
Even if nobody's showing up, I'm still there because I need to, you know, to continue dancing. Like I tell folks, you know, we're going to continue decolonizing our bodies in this class on a weekly basis, and reading dhikr and eating good supu kanja around family people. Gumbo sauce. Just cook it and invite me and have people over. That's perfect self-care for me.
That's fantastic. Yes, I'm looking for where's I need the online dance again. Somebody, because like I can't always get to Detroit. Although alhamdulillah, this semester here at University of Michigan, I've been able to get some good classes in. But like dance is life, and I need more of that. So whenever anybody doing that little circle, call me. I'm there.
You know, I want Angelica to send me a playlist because mine is worn.
Can we do one day where we do like cultural dance swap or favorite dances, like traditional dances? Like I feel like I'll watch like Sadie do her stuff. I'll watch you, Dr. Saad, do your stuff. And then I'm like, oh, I'd love to share like the Jandad, different traditional Somali dances, but I'm like, where do I share? So
Let me tell you, child.
That
At
sounds like
your age, while your muscles still work, do all of them. Okay, because you could be my age when I have to get up and talk to the muscles to get them to work.
but Dr. Aldine, do you want to get on camera and close us out?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Suad, who is on a sabbatical, but let me rope her into facilitating what is a wonderful conversation. This is only number one. Number two, I'm gonna prick you in a different kind of way, designed to make you, I don't know what he's doing, designed to make you uncomfortable. Because I am a firm believer that there is any faith, one has to own it. And if you don't own it, I don't know what you're doing. You know, maybe it's performance or some of those other words. Okay, but you have to own it. And none of you in this conversation talked about how spirituality drives you to do what you do, but that's okay. I put that on my list for the next time. It has been a pleasure. I mean, this was the fastest 2 hours I've had in a long time. And I want to thank those who came to listen and chat with us. You all have been a pleasure too. And hope that you come back for our next convening. All of you online, I'm going to ask you to stay on, and I'm going to kick everybody else off because I have some words for them in particular.
You mean the panelists should stay on?
The panelists should stay
Okay,
on.
we'll stay on, and everybody else, it was great to see y'all. Assalamu alaikum. Have a
Go
wonderful
eat lunch.
day.
Salaam alaikum, and thank you very much.